Well, hello, everyone. We're here at the USA Radio Museum, and it's my great honor to be having a chance to talk with an old friend of mine and also one of the legends in broadcasting, Bob Hardt. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hi, Jim. I'm well. How you doing?
And I'm here in the heat in Palm Springs, and of course, you're in the desert as well. So I wanted to get on record, some things about your career that maybe a lot of people don't know, especially the younger people who are in broadcasting now. They may have probably have heard your name, but I thought we would take a trip back down memory lane and back to the beginning. So tell me, briefly, what drew you to broadcasting in the first place?
My speech teacher in high school. He was my homeroom teacher, my speech teacher, my debate coach, and supervisor of all the audiovisual stuff at my high school. And I was the guy doing all of the audiovisual stuff for him in terms of the school's public address system, which I rebuilt in my junior and senior years in high school. And anyway, he said to me one day, I guess it was probably in my junior year in high school, he said, why don't you follow in the footsteps of a number of my other debaters and speech students and just walk down the street to the radio station, WKHM, which was a block down from my high school. He said, go in and get yourself a part-time job, why not? I think you'd love it. And I'd always been a radio buff. I grew up with radio before we even had television in my house. So I said, yeah, and why not? So I walked down, auditioned for the program director at WKHM, and a day or so later I had a job as a part-timer, working whatever they needed me to do, weekends or during the day, riding board at the studio when our main DJs were on remote. And that's how it all started. Had a 1,000-watt radio station in Jackson, Michigan. In 1957 on my, 16th birthday, as a matter of fact.
Wow. So did you have the voice then that you have now?
I had a better voice then. I think with age, and I'm pushing 84 here, I think my vocal cords have gotten a little scratchy and a little weak after using them for 50, 60 years on the air and all that. But I had a very good voice. And
wow.
So
some people are lucky; they're blessed when they're born. I did not.
Tell me about it.
So from there, you went to Detroit. You got a big break at WXYZ, the ABC station in Detroit. How did that come about?
Well, I was at WKHM for 6 years, spending my junior and senior years in high school and my 4 years in college at Michigan. Well, 2 years at Jackson Community College and my final 2 years at Michigan State University in East Lansing. And about a month before I graduated from Michigan State, I got a call one day from Ed Hardy, the news director at WXYZ in Detroit. Ed and I had known each other for a number of years. When I started in Jackson, Ed had just come back from a tour of duty in the Marine Corps and was news director at WKHM. That's how we met, got to become close friends, and that's how he, I guess, sized up my ability to do air work and also to write, which was important for a news guy. Anyway, Ed called up and said, Hardt, and he talked like an old Marine, of course. Hardt, barking orders. I need you for summer replacement in my newsroom at WXYZ. 11 weeks of work after a scale, you'll work every shift on the clock as my regular news guys. We didn't have news gals in those days in radio. It was all men. As all of my staff takes their vacations. And I know you're going back for your masters in the fall, and this will work perfectly. You'll be through with that just about the time, through with the summer work just about the time you go back to Michigan State. I said, yeah, sure. Why not? That's how it all started at Wixie. The day after I graduated from MSU, hopped in the car and drove through to Detroit. That started me on my career with ABC. XYZ, of course, was an ABC-owned and operated radio station. And that started me on a 40-plus year career with ABC. Never looking back.
So was in the beginning, was your thought process, were you focused that you might be able to go to like XYZ or one of those big markets?
Not really. Yeah, I thought about it, sure, yeah. But at WKHM, which was a really great little radio station in a medium-sized market, it was a great place to learn everything about about the business from the ground up. I don't see very many of those opportunities for young people in broadcasting today. Most small stations are computers in closet and voice tracked and syndicated program delivered by satellite. I don't see the kind of opportunities that I had in Jackson, being a disc jockey, an engineer, sweeping the floor, doing news, covering city council meetings for the news department, doing all that sort of stuff. It didn't exist anymore. But KHM, I had seen small stations were notorious for being revolving doors. You would see people on their way up in the business and people on their way down in the business. They'd had their day and they were cycling back down through smaller markets into their latter years. And I said, the turnaround is just too much. There's no stability, at least on the air side in this business. And I'd like something a little more stable in life, which is why I came out of Michigan State all set and licensed to be a high school history teacher. That was my goal. If I do radio on the side while I'm teaching kids history in high school, fine, great side occupation. I can do that in summer when school's out. But I never really seriously considered the radio business back then at least, as a full-time occupation. XYZ kind of changed my mind. I got bitten by the news bug at Wixie. We had probably a 9 or 10 man news department there, and a lot of old veterans still around from the old days. And I really got my teeth into it. And it was about 2 weeks before the end of my 11-week summer sojourn there that Ed came to me one day in his typical U.S. Marine fashion, said, "Hardt, we want you full time, Monday through Friday, morning drive anchor. It's you're still after scale, but it'll be a little bit better than you had with the summer stuff." And at that point, it was a crisis point in my life in a way, because I had to make a decision. Do I give up my plans to teach high school history? Do I give up my plans to go back for my master's degree in the fall? Do I want to really set out on a full-time job at this point until I'm fully educated, if you will? And I mulled it over and said, finally, okay, I've been going to school for 13 years in my life. Let's take a break, a sabbatical, if you will. Let's get out in the real world and see if it bites. Or bites back. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. You're on. So that's, 2 weeks later, I began full time at Wixie, morning drive anchor, Monday through Friday. Best air shift on the station as far as I was concerned. And I loved it. I did go back, work on my master's part-time at Michigan State. You will remember me getting off the air at 11 o'clock, 12 noon, hopping in the car and driving 70 miles up to East Lansing once a week to do my seminars and stuff for my master's. And I continued that until Uncle Sam came calling. Knock, knock, knock. I want you. Lyndon Johnson was this is mid-60s now, 66. Lyndon Johnson scarfing up bodies for the Vietnam War. So at that point, I had another crisis point. What do? Do I just sit around on my tail end and get drafted for 2 years? Do I go into officer candidate school? And I had the opportunity to do that with the Air Force. That would have been a 4-year commitment to the military, and I wasn't really about to do that. And as luck would have it, one of our technical directors at WXYZ TV, which is in the same building as the radio station, Mel Wasserman, who was an officer in a Army Reserve unit in Ann Arbor, said, "Hey, why don't you join the Army Reserve? It'll be a 6-year commitment, but only 6 months active duty for your training and then summer camps for the rest of your time. And I got this neat unit over in Ann Arbor, which is a unit of AFARTS, Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. We're the kind of unit that if the Army needs to mobilize and needs additional people for AFART stations in various places like the Canal Zone or Korea or Germany, whatever, they would call us up and we go to active duty. Hey, it sounds like a fine match. So, long story short, I enlisted in the Army Reserve, went off for 6 months of my basic training, came back, and here I was again, back on the air at XYZ.
So at XYZ, I mean, there was a lot of history to that radio station, Home of the Lone Ranger, and other shows that were big. And some of the air talent was, legendary. Any stories, any thoughts about things that happened to you with regard to that?
Yeah, it was a real hoot working for a number of the people who had been around long enough to work on some of those old dramatic radio shows, the ones that were aimed at the kids. You mentioned the Lone Ranger, the Green Hornet, Sergeant Preston of the Yukon and his Wonder Dog King, woof, woof, all that. And I had just missed working with Fred Foy. Fred was the narrator on the Lone Ranger. He was the guy who started off there, cloud of dust, hearty, hi-oh, silver, the Lone Ranger. Rise. Anyway, Fred was a legend in the business by that time for his work on the Ranger. And he had been sucked off to New York by ABC and was on the announcing staff at ABC in New York by that. But a number of people, directors, producers, engineers, talent, and a lot of talent would come through Wixie just to use the place as a place to cut auditions or commercials or what have you. So among the people that I would cross paths with, and you'll remember some names, Ruben Weiss. Ruben was a dramatic actor and commercial spokesman in Detroit, little short guy. And what a voice. Oh, my God. He kind of reminded me of what I considered his New York counterpart, Jackson Beck, whose voice is Superman. All right. Well, Rube was the same way in Detroit, and he'd go, I remember vividly, he would come through and join up with our afternoon disc jockey, Joel Sebastian. Joel's this tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed specimen, if you will.
Matinee Idol, I think, would be
Matinee Idol. Here's Rube standing next to him, about half his height, the microphone before them. And they'd be in old Studio C taping Detroit Dragway commercials, Sunday at Detroit Dragway. And Rube would literally be vibrating like that. And I got a chance to talk with him about some of the old timers. The guy whose place I took doing the morning news on Wixie was Dick Osgood. Dick was another dramatic actor in the stable of dramatic actors and broadcast talent in Detroit. And Dick was the entertainment reporter for WXYZ. And we'd trade stories with him. Another guy, our morning disc jockey, Fred Wolf, had what we called an ET man. You started out that way. He was the guy who would play all the commercials and spin the records while Fred would sit at the desk with a big microphone and be a disc jockey. But he wouldn't have to do all that backstage work. And one of the guys who was Fred's ET man in the morning was a guy named Don Davenport. And Don was one of the directors on the Ranger and Sergeant Preston and all that. And there was one other guy whose name sticks in my mind. I don't know if you ever knew him or not. He was an engineer. He was the senior IBEW engineer on staff at Wixie when I went there. His name was Ray Spana. And Ed kind of warned me about him when I came in. He said, "You've never worked with union engineers before." And our chief of staff, if you will, on the IBEW crew is Ray Spana. Very good engineer, but he's a stickler for the contract, And at that time, we had decided to expand the newsroom, and Monday through Friday have a full-time engineer in the newsroom now, processing all the audio material used. And Ray, as a result of being senior staff member, had first crack at that when the job opened up, and he took it. And Ed said, just be very careful. Well, Ray and I became fast friends. What a delight to work with. It was a challenge for him, a new challenge he hadn't had in a long time. He got into it. He would do somersaults for us in the newsroom to get stuff on the air and record it. And he is the one who would, in our down times, when we'd have a chance to talk, would tell me stories about the recording or live broadcasts of the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet and some. And some of Ray's stories would, I don't know if I could tell them here or not, but probably can, but they were legendary. And he walked in one day for me and handed me a 7-inch reel of tape. And he said, keep this. You'll treasure it someday. And on it was a prime quality duplicate of the Lone Ranger's 30th anniversary radio broadcast, which was done in 1953. Ranger started in 33, so it would have been 20th anniversary. And it was the 20th anniversary retrospect telling how the Lone Ranger came to be and all this sort of thing. And it was, my God, the whole thing is sent down the network to ABC, complete with the Cheerios commercials and all that. And Ray was a great friend, and unfortunately we lost him. He had a condition which would have caused him to occasionally go into a seizure, and he had one day driving on Telegraph Road, and rammed his car into a light pole, and that was within the first year of me being at Wixie. So that was a great loss, but also was a great friendship and a great source of information about the old times as it used to be at the station.
So after XYZ, you were there for,
5 years.
5 years. I think you got the call to go to New York. How did that come about?
Well, again, it was Ed Hardy, Mr. Ex-Marine. Ed had moved on from WXYZ about a year after I got to the station. He moved on to become news director at WABC, the key station of the ABC owned and operated group, 77 WABC, premier top 40 station. And I had just been back about 3 months from my active duty with the U.S. Army Reserve. And Ed called me one day and said, Hardt, here we go again. I need someone to do news in the afternoon drive at WABC. You know the way they've always done it here. We've had staff announcers like Fred Foy and a number of so many other talented ones who read the news, and we have a staff of writers belonging to the Writers Guild of America who write the news, and never the twain shall meet. They would write the news, then they'd hand it to one of the after announcers. The announcer would go in the studio and read the news that had been written for him without having any involvement in putting it together, researching the story, or really generally knowing anything about it. And he said, we're moving over to the concept of what the unions in New York like to call reader-writer. You not only write the news, but you read it. And you don't have to be in two unions. You can stick with AFTRA. The only stipulation is you write all your own copy, but you can't write for anybody else. Hey, no, I don't want to write for anybody else. I didn't start out to have that as an ambition in my life. But he said, I want you for afternoon drive, basically noon to 8 p.m. And you'll do our premier 6 p.m. news broadcast, which was at that time called the 6 o'clock report. It was a news block that ran from network news at 5:55, 6 o'clock report for 10 minutes, and then 5 minutes of Howard Cosell speaking in spurts, or speaking of sports, whatever it was. Anyway, and I said, okay, you got a deal. So in late November of 1967, I flew to New York and did an audition for Rick Sklar. Even though Ed wanted me and I was a known quantity at ABC O&Os, I still had to do an audition for the premier program director, Rick Sklar, the genius behind WABC's success. So I went there, did that, and a day later I got the call. Okay, Hardt, you're hired. You start January right after the first of the year, as soon as you can get here. January, the end of December 67, I left WXYZ. And January 6th was my first day on the air in New York. So that's how that came to be, which says something for knowing people in the right place at the right time. Ed was
really
my mentor. Really.
Yeah, he was a mentor for you. And I mean, what if you hadn't had him? You would have obviously had great success anyway, but the trail of going from Jackson to Detroit to New York is pretty unprecedented. It's a short trip.
At that time in my life, Jim, I had worked, by the time I got to New York, I had worked for 3 radio stations in my life, starting my 16th birthday, and I was, 26 when I got to New York. Jackson, Detroit, New York, 3 radio stations.
Compare
that with some of the people who went through the door, worked for 10, 11 radios. Hey, what's the matter, guy? Can't you keep a job?
When you got to New York, of course, part of your shift was to be the newsman for Dan Ingram on WABC. And, of course, Dan was thought of as the greatest disc jockey of all time by many. I guess that was kind of fun for you, wasn't it? You had a good time with him?
It was kind of fun. It was a learning experience. I will endorse the fact that Dan is a GOAT, greatest of all time, at least in my book. I've known and worked with a lot of talented disc jockeys over the years. Dan still ranks number 1. He had this uncanny ability to ad-lib. And in the short space that he was allowed to talk between records and commercials and the whole thing, in 10 or 15 seconds, he could get off some crazy ad libs and funny stuff that would leave you absolutely on the floor. Double entendre humor before Howard Stern, and he was just great. And proof of that, he did extensive freelance work as a voiceover commercial artist. You'd hear Dan on a number of things. I walked into the studio one day, do my newscast. How are you? What you been up to? He said, well, I was in the studio this morning, cross town, cutting a commercial for, and I forgot what it was. And I said, oh yeah, you've done them stuff for them before. And he said, yeah, I've made a lot of money off them. They bought the addition to my house out on Long Island. Paid for it, literally. But Dan was great. It really was. And Dan really made me feel welcome right off the bat. I mean, within the first week, he tried to break me up and succeeded. And he then bestowed upon me the moniker Bob Hardt, the world's skinniest newsman. At that time, I was 6 feet tall, still am just about, and 155 pounds. So I was kind of thin for that height. And he picked up on that, so I was the world's skinniest newsman. And into almost every newscast I did in his program, I was introduced with a Bob Hardt is so skinny joke, like, Bob Hardt is so skinny, he put a red yarmulke on his head and went to a masquerade party as a matchstick. Boom, boom, things like that. Every newscast, and I of course never knew what was coming. So anyway, and he do some. Oh yeah, he a number of times. I got back at him really good once. He was doing this. This studio was full of visitors at the time. I had a news booth off to the side, and he started doing this introduction based on the contemporary ABC Contemporary Radio Network news sounder that went da 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 bum bum bum. Okay, and. So he said, one day Bob Hardt is, out in the woods, and this hungry lion comes upon him. And the hungry lion is about to eat Bob, but Bob whips out his convenient bum-bum gun, aims it at the lion, and goes bum-bum. And Bob survived. And next thing I know, I hear the news intro text. My comeback was, in WABC News headlines... The whole studio went on the floor. So and, that became one of my comebacks for him. But yeah, that's the kind of relationship we had on the air. So it was good. So good working with real pros. And he wasn't the only one. Oh my, so many others at WABC that you would remember. Cousin Brucey, of course. In the morning when I started, we had a guy who'd been around New York radio for a number of years, Herb Oscar Anderson. He was an old singer, And he sang his introductory song every morning. He'd recorded it many years ago. It's called Hello Again. So even if he wasn't in the studio, by the time 6 o'clock came and he went on the air, they'd start playing his theme, Hello Again, that sort of thing. It was old-fashioned music, if you will, 1940s style vocal. But that was Herb Oscar Anderson. Ron Lundy in the middays. What a hoot it was with Ron. You may remember Ron Lundy if the name doesn't ring a bell. If you ever saw the movie Midnight Cowboy with John Voight and Dustin Hoffman. Anyway, there's this point where the Midnight Cowboy, John Voight, is on the bus coming into New York City, the big town with the ambition of taking the big town by storm. He's sitting in the bus. And you see the Lincoln Tunnel approaching. He's got his transistor radio up to his ear, and Ron Lundy did the voice. I says, "Welcome, it's WABC. Welcome to New York, the greatest city in the world." That was the sound. That was Ron. Okay, so
wow.
Anyway, a host of other great people. So
yeah, and then you got a call again. To go to network news.
Yeah, I started that I got to WABC in January of '68, and what am I trying to think of? Oh yeah, January of '68, and a couple of months later, a side note, one of my good friends worked with me. You may remember from Keener 13 in Detroit. There was a news guy there named John Maher. But 2 or 3 weeks after I'd gotten to New York, Ed came to me and said, "Hardt, I need another one of you to do Morning Drive newscast with Herb Oscar Anderson. Do you know anybody?" And I scratched my head and I said, "I know one guy in Detroit, kind of on the street friends meeting as we're out there covering stories. I don't know him personally, but I know his work on the air. He's excellent. His name is John Maher. He's over at WKNR, Keener 13. And about a month later, Jack walked in the door, and we worked together for the rest of our time at WABC. We lived 5 minutes apart from each other in New Jersey, became one of my best ever friends, members of the same radio club and all that. So anyway, Jack had started doing some freelance work. He had gotten a call from the network to fill in, and shortly after that, I got the same call from Dick Dressel, the Contemporary Network manager, to do freelance work, fill-in work, odd hours or odd shifts that the regulars couldn't do. So Jack and I were both, by middle part of 1968, 69, I guess it was, we were both doing freelance work at different times up at the network. And that's how I got my foot in the door up there. I had made up my mind shortly after doing that and seeing the operation that that's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be a rock and roll disc jockey's news guy all my life. I really wanted to get into really deeply serious news coverage, and I figured that was the place to do it. And I was stymied in a way for the next, 69, 70, 10 years before I went to the net full time. Vice President of Network News, Tom O'Brien, loved me. He said, "I'll give you all the work that you can do, but I can't hire you full time." He said, if to do that, to take you away from WABC, I would get accused of robbing the O&O stations of their news talent. And I can't do that. And some other people had the same experience. My friend Keeve Berman, who was also on that Contemporary Network, had been at KQV, our O&O in Pittsburgh. And Tom told him the same thing. "Keeve, I can't hire you because you're in an O&O. I can't take you away. You go someplace else and work for 6 months, I'll hire you." That's exactly what Keeve did. He went to WOR-FM in New York, and 6 months later, Tom hired him. So anyway, that stymied me for the next 10 years from going to the network full time. But I freelanced my ass off there. I would work usually 2 or 3 days a week on a weekend there, in addition to my Monday through Friday shift at WABC. Or I do for a while I was doing the 9:55 p.m. network news, and I go from WABC uptown to the network studios and work for another 2 hours doing a network newscast. So that's how I got my foot in the door, how I established myself up there, and they got to know me. And when the management of the network changed, I saw my opportunity because the guy who came in to take Tom's place was another friend of mine. He'd been news director at WLS and KGO, two of our other O&Os. I knew him, he knew me, he knew where I wanted to be, and eventually we made it happen. That is how in 1979, April, I made the transition from WABC to the network full-time. And I remained there until I retired in 2004. Nutshell, that's the story.
So all those years, you obviously covered a lot of the most important events that happened in the world. And any thoughts about some of the ones that you did cover?
The one that prompted my decision to retire is the one that I probably remember most prominently. That was 9/11. I, of course, was at the network full-time then. And I did what we call the afternoon drive for the West Coast, going at 4 in the afternoon, and I would do the network news from 6 p.m. through 11 p.m., the newscast there. Mornings, I got up and I'd have a leisurely breakfast and, maybe go to the gym and work out for a while and come home, have lunch, take a nap, get up, shower, and go to work. So it's the morning of 9/11, I'm sitting at my breakfast table, having my cup of coffee and my munchies, and I have the radio on 1010 WINS, WINS, one of the all-news radio stations there, the only surviving one, as it turns out. And I heard the report about a plane going into the World Trade Center, and I'm listening to this, and I'm saying to myself, no, this can't just be a small plane or an accident. And it turned out, as the story went on, it obviously looked not like an accident. So I called my then ex-wife, Jane, in Connecticut. She worked for CBS for a number of years and taught at Columbia J School. And I said, Jane, have you been following the news? Turn on your TV. And we both turned on our TVs. And of course, this whole thing was timed, I'm convinced, to coincide with the morning drive traffic helicopters over New York. And so all the traffic helicopters were still up at about 8:45 when plane number 1 went into the North Tower. And so we're sitting there watching and talking to each other on the phone. And all of a sudden, the plane number 2 hits the South Tower. And I said, hon, I got to go. So I grabbed my ever-packed overnight bag and hopped in the car and headed for the GW Bridge to go into town. I lived in New Jersey. And I couldn't get across the bridge, even with press credentials and press plates on my car. They had sealed it off. So I backtracked, went up the Palisades Parkway to Westchester County, Rockland County, went across the Tappan Zee Bridge down into Westchester, tried to get in through Westchester into the Bronx. Couldn't do that. That was blocked off. So I called the desk in New York and I said, I'm ready, willing, and able, but I can't get in. They said, go home, sit. When you can get in, get in. So I wound up sitting there until the next day. When I finally was able to get in about 12 noon, something like that. But it was frustrating as hell. One of the biggest stories of my entire career, and I couldn't get in to cover the damn thing. And I was also worried about my daughter, Callie. She had just begun her freshman year at New York University, and the NYU campus was only blocks away from Ground Zero. And she was in a dorm there. And, of course, all the phone service was out, so neither Jane, my ex, nor I could get through to Callie. We didn't know what had happened to her, how she was. It was a very frustrating day, just waiting it out and watching it. That was the end of my career. That's where I made up my mind. I've covered the worst of human nature and the worst of Mother Nature for, 40 years, something like that. And you have to let this crap roll off your back when you're doing it, otherwise it gets to you. That one I couldn't roll off my back. We lost one of the ABC transmitter engineers up top the World Trade Center with that down. And my coach, my gym coach, who is the son of a police captain down in, was it Weehawken, I guess? Anyway, he spent several days as a volunteer trudging through the rubble at World Trade Center, searching for victims and stuff. And I said, okay, I've done it all. I don't need to do any more of this. So when the time is right, I'll look ahead. That's when I want to hang it up. That was the end, the beginning. In 1963, when I joined WXYZ, went full-time in September. In November, President Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah.
And I'd just gotten off my morning shift at XYZ, standing in the Wixie newsroom with Ed, when the teletypes went bonkers. Kennedy shot in Dallas. And the whole weekend was another story from that point on. So my career in covering news for ABC was bookmarked by the Kennedy assassination on one end and 9/11 on the other.
I seem to remember when the OJ thing was happening, you were at that point saying, I am really through with this and ready to go. That was quite a long experience.
That was a long, drawn out thing. Same story every day. We seemed to rehash it over and over again. And I got bored with it. Really, that's what happened there. And I had one other story that was of significance just before I retired, and that was the Iraq War. The Iraq War, and I remember being on the air when we got the first satellite phone call to our correspondent in Baghdad as the first bombs were falling on Baghdad, and was anchoring that for a number of hours. But so you look back on it all and say, hey, I had a really good run, some great stories to cover, including Watergate, all that thing with Nixon, and the Johnson presidency going up in flames, and the Iran hostage crisis, which ended Jimmy Carter's presidency effectively, and
Robert Kennedy's assassination.
Kennedy. Oh yeah, well, you and I were on the same active duty thing with the Army Reserve down in Panama. That the night that happened. Remember? Was it you who went into the barracks and woke me up and said, "Get the hell ass down to the studio"? Kennedy's been shot.
It was something.
Oh yeah.
You got out perhaps just at the right time. The evolution of news has really changed dramatich What do you feel about what's going on?
I am so glad I don't have to cover what's going on right now. I am really, I am in tears for my country. I don't like what I see happening to it, and the way it's going down. I don't see the incursion into the news media independence that is happening now. And I'm glad I'm not in broadcasting anymore, at least radio broadcasting. The industry you and I grew up in and worked in all our lives and knew so well is a shadow of what it used to be. Changing media environment in large part is responsible for that. People now getting news and information and music off their iPhones or iPads or whatever streaming services, and and radio stations. Starting with a deregulation in 1976, when big money companies were allowed to amass hundreds of radio stations and take them over and literally milk them for everything that they were worth, and leaving them shells of what they once were. That destroyed local radio. So, Jim, I got out just in time,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, and also it's hard to know what is news anymore, and people have such a distrust of anything they hear. And if they find a friendly spot, at least in their minds, they tend to believe what they see, which is really scary.
It is really scary. It is really scary. Radio, I think, had something to do with the as AM stations were thrown on the ropes through a lack of listeners, and music went all over to FM after really the late 1970s, and AM stations didn't know what to do. They gravitated toward talk formats, and the easy one to do was right-wing talk. And you had the flowering of Rush Limbaugh from KFBK in Sacramento. One of my old bosses at ABC is the guy who discovered Limbaugh at KFBK. Brought him to New York initially to do a 3-hour morning show on local radio, WABC, which by that time had switched to a talk format. And it wasn't long after that that they saw the advantage of syndicating Rush. So when it started out, Rush's first hour was on WABC only, and then the next 2 hours were syndicated nationally. And eventually the separate WABC thing went away, and Rush was his whole 3-hour total syndication. But it was that kind of approach to politics, the take no prisoners, no compromise stuff that Limbaugh was, and his wannabe successors, like Hannity and the rest. I think that started the separation, or is one of the things that started the divisions in this country that we see now. Between right and left, and the left wing side, if you will, the liberal side, never managed to muster, at least on radio, anybody that came close to the influence that Limbaugh had established. Maybe if Rachel Maddow had come along a few years, that would have changed, but it didn't. I know Governor Cuomo tried doing radio for a while, and that went down the tubes in flames. So, anyway, I'm glad I'm out of the business now, but I look back on it very fondly. Great times, and led to a great retirement out here in lovely California.
So how is your retirement?
It's great. It's hard to believe, Jim. This is July of 2025. I retired in January of 2004. So I've been out of the business now for 21 years. Hard to imagine. I didn't think I'd live this long after retiring at the age of 62. But I have, and it's been a good retirement. I actually did some freelance work out here in radio for a while. That has dried up as the stations have fallen on hard times and local radio has gone down tubes. But I initially freelanced at a station group that was owned by Rick and Rosie Supple. Rosie's dad was George A. Richards, the call letters WGAR in Cleveland. They were his, and he also owned WJR in Detroit. Pioneer in the business, and his daughters bit the bullet and went with it. She and her husband acquired a group of stations out here. I did a couple of freelance gigs for them. It was, just basically fill in. And an outfit out here called Alpha Media bought some of a group of stations, including the main news talk station. And I did news fill-in for them for a couple of years before their budget shrank. And they couldn't afford to hire a second news person, let alone a fill-in. When their one and only news director, news on-air news guy goes on vacation or gets sick, they don't do news. They plug the station into the CBS network once an hour. They consider that news. So
that doesn't sound like retirement to me, but
oh, it's good. Retirement for me is doing something I never had a chance to do when I was in my working years, and that is travel. My husband and I have traveled the world over, literally, since 2009, 2010. A large part of it in Southeast Asia, but Europe as well. And have had a chance to get out and see the world. Hell, it's been great, and I'm going to do it as long as I still can physically be able to do it.
One thing we haven't talked about, probably the last thing we should cover, is that you also are amazing with electronics, building and read from scratch, all kinds of things. You have a workshop in your garage that looks like you should have it in a building somewhere with a big sign on the door. That's a love of yours, I know.
It has been since I was a kid, since before I got into broadcasting. Was always fascinated by radio and what made radios work. So when I was a little kid back in the early 50s and before TV and listening to the Lone Ranger on radio, I'd sit there and look at the big dial, and listen to all this stuff. And where's that coming from? And I'd pull the radio out and looking back at, ooh, little lights and tubes and things like that. And what do they all do? And then we got our first TV set. This is my hometown, Jackson, Michigan. There was a company there called Spartan Electronics, well known in electronics. Spartan radios were high-end radios back in the 30s and 40s and early 50s. And anyway, an engineer from Spartan, Herman Sorum was his name, was our TV repairman. He did TV repair as a side, and we had a Spartan brand TV set, a 17-inch black and white console. Mr. Sorum would come over and every now and then, when the need would be, and service our TV set. He'd be there down on his hands and knees in the back, doing things, and I'd be looking over his shoulder, trying to ask him questions about driving him nuts, probably. And one day, his daughter was a classmate of mine in grade school. So one day, Mr. Sorum calls my dad and said, got to let you know that I've just accepted a new job in California, so we're going to be moving to California, and I'll find a new TV repair guy for you. But I have this entire workshop full of electronic radio parts and what have you, and I know your son is really rabidly interested in this. Would it be okay if I just gave him all this stuff? Tubes, capacitors, you name it. And my dad said, yeah. So pickup truck comes over, and Mr. Sorum unloads into our basement this stash of everything imaginable, and that just kicked me off on the learning curve. And I've always been self-taught. I took physics in college and high school and the whole thing, and so I knew a little bit about electronic theory from that. But long before that, I taught myself electronics, basically. Taught myself the electronics necessary to be a ham radio operator. Taught myself the electronics necessary to get my first-class FCC radio telephone license, which back in those days would have allowed me to operate any radio or TV station transmitter that I was assigned to. Never had to use that in work. Especially after, by the time I got to Detroit, everything from Detroit, New York was all unionized. So union engineers did all that. In one place in New York, even, we couldn't even turn our own microphones on and off. The engineer had to do that. So let alone get into the techie end of it. But I always was interested in it. And I always felt, especially in the broadcasting end of it, I needed to know just about everything that my engineer that I was working with knew about how to operate a tape recorder, what you could do with it, what you couldn't do with it, how you did tape splices, how you edited and stuff. I need to know as much as they do, so I know if they're not bullshitting me about not being able to do something, or whatever. So that was my path in electronics. From oh look, I have a telephone call, and I'm just going to mute it. Hang on. Sorry, that's my husband calling from work. But that's for later. So anyway, that's how I got into electronics as a kid, and it's just followed me all the way through. So
well, you fixed a lot of things for me. I appreciate that. So you're my go-to guy if I have a crash in this computer system here.
I'm doing things now for the Homeowners Association where I work. We have a group set up that literally has laid in preparations for when the big earthquake hits. And out here in California, it's not a question of if, but when. We're 300 years overdue for a big one. So we here in my community of about 1,000 homes have quite a system set up for emergency care of all sorts. And I'm head of the communications unit in that. And we and myself and 4 other hams out here maintain that, the radio systems that we need for communications and the satellite stuff we need to connect with Starlink and the stuff. So I still have my fingers in it.
So you're going to save me if in a crisis?
Yeah, move in. Come on out. Y'all come. We've got lots of houses out here.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for spending the time with me. It's I know a lot of this stuff, but a lot of it I didn't know. It's really fascinating to hear it like this. You know, it's you've had an amazing career, an amazing life, and you know, I wish you the very best in the next 50 or 60 years. And I just lost your mic; it just went out. So.
Sorry, there it is. Is that back now? Yeah, I think it is.
You say you're good at this electronic stuff, but I don't know. Maybe
I just touched a cable on the side of the computer. That probably did it. Now, one of the highlights of and in this business, you make many friends, and you're a friend of long-standing duration. I met you that summer. I was working at XYZ as a part-timer, and you were spinning records for the Jocks. So I've known you, you know, ever since. I went to New York, you went to Chicago and Los Angeles, and we somehow managed to stay in touch over all these years.
well, it's
Yeah,
been great.
that's a nice thing about this business that I found. They've made friendships and kept so many of them over the years.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful club, I think.
Yeah,
that we belong.
exactly.
Bob, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, Jim. Thank you. That's a
All
hoot.
right.
Bye-bye.